What's up, everybody? Axe Wizard here, back with some more work on my game. Now, this is more work to the StarSystemMapperTool, so I don't have any progress to show in the game right now, but I did do a lot of stuff with this mapper tool, so let me go run you through what I did. So, first things first, this is the same map that I had from my last devlog, you know, in the game where I could leap to one system, but now I added a lot of different stuff. So if I left click here to add a new system, you're gonna see it looks a lot different. There's a whole lot of other fields here that I added, so let's go ahead and just run through and just add a new system here. So I'm gonna name this one just testing system LOL, just for funsies. For adding locations, I'm just gonna add like, oh, I don't know, location 1, location 2, right? I should have a better way to sort of separate these. I think I might add like a vertical separator in between those. I still have to do a make a way to edit these. So if I want to get rid of those, I need to figure that out. So then I can set what faction this system belongs to. So say for testing, we're going to set faction to bros. Now this is the big feature for this thing, is I devised a system that will allow me to determine ship spawning probabilities. So what that means is, like, you know, if I'm at, say, Genesis, which is like the main system that has Earth, that's probably going to be a damn pretty busy system. So there's going to be tons of like freighter ships going in and out. There's going to be some capital ships in there, you know, some carriers and cruisers, some fighters going around scanning ships, all that stuff. So it's going to be like a huge metropolis hub, and there's going to be lots of ships. But if I'm in some remote outpost system, there's probably not going to be like any carrier ships or anything. Oh, in fact, I see a bug here. Why does this say cruiser? Let me fix that really quick. So this UI will let me specify not only what breakdown of ship classes I want. So for example, in that scenario where I'm in some weird outpost system, I probably want, you know, I mean, maybe there might be like 50% fighters that might be there. There might be, I don't know, 30% freighters there. So here you can see I've got this error message here that does not equal. I tried rigging this up to where it has a bunch of sliders, but trying to manage slider groups and make sure that they always have a sum of 100, it's a lot harder than I thought. I was able to get it to work where if you adjust one slider, it adjusts all the others. But what I ran into is, say for example, if I want to have a system that only has fighters, you know, I could drag fighters up to like 100, and then it should drag everything back down, and it did. But it was a lot harder because if I wanted to drag, I didn't have a way to like exclude sliders that I didn't want to touch. So for example, if carrier was just set to 0 already, and I was messing around with other sliders, it kept also tweaking the value for carrier, and I had to keep dropping it back down to 0, and it was annoying. So I couldn't find a way to do exactly what I wanted. I even asked like ChatGPT a bunch and ran it through and tried a bunch of its solutions, and then just nothing was working. So I just straight up went text fields, and now I'm responsible for making sure everything lines up. So if something doesn't add up, I just do some validation code that just tells me like, hey, you can't have 105% chance of like summoning stuff. So you can see 50 plus 30 plus 25, that is 105. So we want everything to be a sum of 100 for our percentages, basically. So let's change cruiser to, I don't know, 20. There we go. So now we're good. So now we have our breakdown of like what ships we expect. So we're not going to see any carriers. You know, maybe I might drop cruiser down to 10, and I might bump freighter up to 40. So you're going to see a lot of freighters and a lot of fighters. And not only can I specify that breakdown of ships, I can also specify what faction those ships will like belong to. So here it's just defaulted to that the ship that if it spawns. So for example, if a fighter spawns, it's gonna 100% chance belong to the independent faction. But what if I want to, you know, add different factions? So say for example, if I want to have maybe, you know, a 50% chance of being an independent faction, and then I want to set maybe bros to be a 25% chance, and then I want to set dudes to also be a 25% chance, right? What did I mess up? All right, so moving on from this little error here, this obviously should equal 100. I just think I don't have one of the fields connected right, so I'll fix that. But this will allow me to specify the breakdown of the faction. So when I implement this in my game, when my spawn system, you know, decides to spawn a ship, it's going to have a breakdown of like what type of ship to spawn, and then it's going to determine like what faction does that ship belong to. And with that, I'll also be able to specify like what exact ship to use. So for example, each faction might have different fighters and different cruisers and freighters. And if it belongs to that faction, I can pick a ship from that faction. Or if it's independent, maybe I got a little bit more leeway on, you know, what ship it can be. So it might be a ship of a different faction, or it might just be some junk down beater, or it might even be like a pirate, who knows? So lots of cool stuff there. This is a first iteration of this. I expect I'll probably add more ship types, and then obviously more factions in the future, but this allows me to get going. So I can specify all this for every type of ship, and then down here I can also determine the ship interval. So for example, if we're in that outpost star system, we don't want ships spawning like every second. Like, it's not a busy system. You don't need to have ships coming in and out all the time. Maybe I want the ships to spawn like every 25 seconds, and then I can add some variation to that. So maybe I want it to be a 5-second variation, so that would make 25. That would make it 20 to 30 seconds. So I can add that there and then make that happen, and then once I hit add system, it adds this system, and I can now link this. Now, if I right click on this, it should load it and allow me to edit it. So you can see here that it has all the same data that we had before. So the name, the locations that it has. Again, I still have to figure out how to modify those. The faction it belongs to, the ship spawning probabilities. You can see it has these probabilities here. So yeah, good stuff. It has everything there. So yeah. I just have to fix that error message that popped up when it shouldn't have popped up, because it's clearly there. So that's working. But what this does is that this allows me to do that for all these systems. And if I right click on Genesis, you can see I have like a more standard kind of breakdown here of more freighters and stuff. It belongs to the harmonious synthocracy. I probably should specify this stuff here, so I can specify, since this is like the main system, I want to have like a 75% chance of the harmonious synthocracy ship to spawn, and maybe only like a 25% chance for an independent, non-affiliated ship to spawn. For fighters. For freighters, maybe I want to have like a healthy mix. So maybe I might have like a good 50% be independent. I might have another, 30, maybe I'll just have 50% be part of the harmonious synthocracy. And then like for cruisers, there's probably going to be quite a few cruisers there. So let's see, let's crank freighter down to 30. Let's crank fighter up to 35. And then let's crank cruiser. I want to make carrier 10. So like 10% of the ships is going to be a carrier. And then so for this, like for cruisers and stuff like that, I want to have the majority of like the warships and stuff in this system probably going to belong to that system faction. And then like for carriers, like all of them should belong to the harmonious synthocracy faction. So I can set that there. And then I want this system to be super busy, so maybe I might have it be a 3-second spawn with, you know, maybe only a 1-second variance. So 2 to 4 seconds. You know, maybe I might make it 2 seconds. That way it's 1 to 3 seconds. So once I have that, I can hit save changes, and then bam, that is now good to go. So if I right click on it again, you can see it has all this data saved. So cool. So now that I can do all this stuff, I can specify more ship spawning probabilities, as well as like faction breakdown for the ships that do spawn. That will allow me to, when I finish reorganizing my code in my game, to make a lot more dynamic systems. And also, it's not shown here, but inside the code, I also still have to add something to determine like what backgrounds to use in the game. So I still have to add some more data to this structure here. So I added the ship spawn interval variance and then the ship probabilities. I still need to add things like, you know, what backgrounds to use for the parallax background and determine how I want to handle that still. So there's still some work being done on this, but the ship spawning system is something that in my actual game in Neurality 3092, I only had loosely done. So if we go to like my main code for Neurality 3092, when like spawning ships, I just have some really bad code to do that. So let me see here. Yeah, so here we go. So in my process event on my very main node, I've got like this spawn ships thing. So if we have spawn ships set to true, we're just decrementing our own timer, and then if the timer is time to spawn, we're just sort of alternating like my testing factions, and then we're setting my spawn timer to be a random interval between 2 and 5 seconds. So that's what we're doing there. So this will allow me to actually make like some sort of actual reusable spawn system, or at the very least use this, but then just make it so that it just uses the spawn values from whatever star system we are currently in. So that will allow a lot more variation to the game as well. You know, being able to control like what ships are spawning in different systems is going to be a pretty huge thing, especially as I get farther along. I start adding even more factions and more ships. It's going to make the universe a lot more diverse, and you know, when I start adding in things like piracy and stuff like that, it could be super fun. So I'm pretty happy with the progress I'm making lately. We got a few more core systems to knock out, and then it'll be just mostly getting my head down, just making art assets and you know, putting together more ships and writing story and dialogue and all that stuff. So the next big things I'm going to do after this is I'm going to obviously implement this into my game. So implement these changes and then make that work. I'm going to add a few more systems in the game, that way I can test it out. I'm going to spruce up the actual in-game map a little bit because it's really rough, and then we're going to go from there. And I think the only really other big systems I have that were on my original requirements for the game was what was it? We got to have some sort of system for random events, so that's going to be fun. And we're gonna have a system for like some sort of like dialogue system where I don't know if it's gonna be like a true, like, you know, Final Fantasy dialogue system where, you know, you're having intricate cutscenes with like, you know, NPCs and stuff like that, but at the very least like a text box that pops up that maybe gives you like a option of what to do, like a yes or a no at the very minimum. More would be better, but we'll see what I can feasibly implement because I've never done that before, so that'll be fun. But so far, I just love the Godot engine. It's fantastic. I can't imagine trying to rig all this stuff up with GameMaker. It'll be a pain, especially with all this UI stuff that I had to do. So that's really cool that I can just make like a quickly external tool here and, you know, handle all this stuff. And yeah, and the cool thing is I also added the ability to delete this system. So if I don't like it, bam, it's gone, and I can go back and add more. So I can still link and unlink systems just like I did before. So that's really cool. But yeah, I think this stuff is going to go a long way. Now I just need to add in backgrounds. That's the next big thing, is determining the backgrounds, like, because that's gonna be a huge thing. And as far as the feel of the game, is what type of backgrounds it has, because right now it's only got the one background. So if we just run the game, that's not the game, this is my game. Let's run this. So if we just run the game, we've only got one little background here. So that should change. I would like to have more backgrounds. You know, if you're in like a very asteroid heavy system, asteroids, I should also figure that out too. So maybe I should add in like an asteroid spawning system as well, to determine like how many asteroids spawn, like what's the asteroid density and stuff like that. So lots of stuff to do to keep me busy, that's for sure. I'm also excited to add in like a bunch more weapons and stuff like that, because I got a lot of cool ideas, and especially implementing like laser beams. That's gonna be dope, because I think Godot does that pretty easy with just like a raycast 2D, and it can handle that a lot easier than GameMaker does. So maybe I might just make a little quick diversion and you know, add in a bunch of lasers or something like that. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how the game is turning out. It's starting to feel like an actual game and not just some half-assed project I threw together. I'm still not sure what I want to do with all the art and everything, because I'm not really an artist. And you know, this kind of looks unprofessional. I really like the look of it, but I just don't know if like everybody will, is the thing. But yeah. Anyway, that's what I got to show for that. Now let's get into the code review portion, where I jump in and I show you how I implemented this change into the StarSystemMapperTool. So first things first, let's talk about something very important. I modified data. So I modified this is technically like database layer stuff, because this star system map is like, you know, the database of all my star systems is essentially what it is. So because I modified it from what it used to be, I have to do what we call like handling migrations. Now this isn't necessarily like migrating data from one database to another. It's something that we just tend to lump all this stuff in at work to call all migrations. It's probably not the best term for it, but I'm just updating the existing data to include the new data fields is what I did. So I created this function called migrations, and I just, let's see, run this down here. So this is all the new data that I added here. So if we look at this, I have it in just one big ass comment. I added ship spawn interval, ship spawn variance, and then ship spawn ship probabilities. Now, probabilities is a dictionary that's got a value for every type of ship we have. Currently, we only have 4 classes of ships: fighters, freighters, cruisers, and carriers. We might add others, like maybe pirate could be its own ship class. You know, I think pirates could probably be a faction, and then they can have fighters, freighters, and all that stuff. But we might add other ship classes as the game goes on. So we need to determine what chance that this type of ship can spawn, and also we needed to determine the faction, and then the chances for the faction to for the spawn ship to be a member of that faction. So that's what all this stuff is here. And what I did is I just made like a little one-off function here that I can run and modify anytime I need to update the data. So I'm just checking for the presence of values and then initializing them to the default value if they do not already exist. So here you can see in my star system map, I am checking for this system that we are working on. Actually, I'm iterating through every star system. So since the star system map is a dictionary, we can use the keys method to get an array of every key in that dictionary. I'm just iterating through that for every key in that array of keys. So like Genesis is a key for a star system. It's what the name of it is. So what we're doing is, hey, if this doesn't already have this this value or this key, this data, then what we're doing is we're going to initialize it at the default value. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just outputting any changes to the console. As I get more systems, I'm going to have to probably output this stuff to a file because the console will only show so much. So if I have, 1,000 systems and later on down in development, I add some new feature and I have to go through and modify every star system to include that new field, there's going to be thousands of different hits to the console, and then it's going to bug out and it's just going to say, print less text because it has a rate limit on that. So for now, that works fine. For the future, I might have to actually make this some sort of like log file that it outputs to that I can view, and I can scan through and see if there were any problems. So good stuff to know there. So then I'm checking the ship spawn variant, doing the same thing. If it doesn't have it, then we're just adding it, and I'm printing something letting me know that I did this. And then the same thing for ship probabilities. I'm just setting that to be our default setup here, where fighters have a 30% chance, freighters have a 40% chance. All the factions are set to independent 100% of the time. So that's what we're doing there. So I made that little migration function, which is just mostly updating the actual data that's in there. That's all that was. So once I was confident that everything worked, I uncommented this line here, and I ran the project. And what that does is it will go through and it will update your map. It won't update your file, it will update your map. So what you can do is you can run it, check your console to see if you had any errors, and then or not errors, but stuff added. You can view that stuff to make sure it was added the way you expect it to, and then once you're done, you stop it, and then you also uncomment the right map to file line, and then it overwrites the file once you're confident that it's done. So this is like a quick and dirty thing here I just added in so that I can do this in the future. If I add more data in the future, I can modify this to only include the new data that I need to check. So yeah, fun stuff there. So let's get into new system, because new system is where a lot of the work happens. So yeah, if we look at our node tree over here, there's just a lot of nodes. It's also a lot of hooked up signals that you can probably see too. So I just kind of built this UI and just started adding in stuff, and I did this in probably a pretty inefficient way. I probably could have just hooked up all the signals by code, but I went through and I hooked them all up via the node editor. So that means that like the whole bottom half of my code is just all signals being hooked up. So that's pretty messy. So let's get in. So we are, let's just start here. So I added this new option here called Edit Existing, because keep in mind, this node is called New System. And I wasn't planning on having a edit thing previously. I was like, if you just want to edit something, you just delete it and then re-add it and then relink it. But as you start adding in more and more fields, that's a pain. You don't want to keep doing that. So if I want to make a slight edit to something, I just want to be able to right click it and then modify like 1 or 2 fields, save that bad boy, and move on with my life. So what I did is I just took New System. I didn't want to make a whole new UI that has all the same fields, so I just repurposed New System to also be able to edit existing systems. And I do that with this Boolean flag here. If it's set to true, it means that we're editing stuff. So and then because of how my deletion code works for safely deleting data, I also have to include the map node, the actual node that's on the map. So I have to include this little guy. So when you mouse over something, I have to track that reference. Otherwise, my delete function that I already have all the logic that safely deletes the node, the line, and everything from the database and cleans up its record from any neighbor systems it might have been included in. All that stuff, to make that work, I just included the map node as well. So I've got that there. And then here we are initializing our star system dictionary to be what we expect for a fresh system. So you can see here we have all the fields that we did before, you know, name, position, locations, faction, neighbor systems, and whether or not it's been discovered yet. And then we also added our 3 new fields, which are a lot more than 3 because you have a dictionary of different dictionaries. But, you know, so we added our 3 new fields and we initialized them to just default values. So then, you know, we're still doing a thing where we're getting all of our UI elements. This was a lot bigger before I switched to a different approach, which I'll show you in just a little bit. But we added a few more things, like an error message that you saw earlier when it was popping up when it probably shouldn't have. But yeah, spawn interval, variance, yeah. So we have all these different nodes that we track, like such as like buttons we need to keep track of, or fields that we need to be aware of. So we track those so we can reference those and update their values. And then so here I have a few different things. So this is where I'm doing something a little bit weird. So I have a dictionary called ship UI elements, and this is going to be populated in the ready function. And what this does is this is going to contain like all the other references I need to all my other UI nodes I need to manage. And the reason why I did it in a dictionary is so I wouldn't have to repeat my code so much. I also made this dictionary of factions because now if you look at a screen here, I've got not only one faction option button to set items for, I've got 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the original 9. So yeah, I've got 9 factions I need to keep on top of. And so rather than just making sure everything was the same, I just have this factions list dictionary, and what I do is I have the name I want to display, the actual item text. This is what is actually going to be set in the in my star system data structure, and then this is the index that the option button uses to determine which option you selected. So I standardize this, that way I can have it be the same for all 9 of my option buttons. And yeah, I also define ship types in an array, so we don't have sliders anymore. So I'll just put percentages. The sliders really turned out bad. So if we look at this UI here, like this is what I was trying to implement, was I could just do things with a slider rather than just line input fields. So these did not work out as well as I thought they would. Just managing a single slider on its own is fine. Managing multiple sliders is a pain. I spent 3 or 4 hours fighting with that and then gave up on that feature and then just reverted it to just using input fields. Way easier. Especially since this is just an internal tool. If it was something like I needed to do this inside the game, which I might do in the future, I might add like some sort of like, you know, creative edit mode or something that you can do. I think that would be fun for a lot of players. Maybe that might be a feature that gets unlocked after you beat the game. So that way you don't ruin the game for yourself. Because I find that if, you know, my son did this with No Man's Sky. He saw me playing No Man's Sky. He thought it was super cool. I let him play it. And within like 2 days, he like discovered everything in like creative mode that he wanted to see, and then he was just done. And he didn't know anything about the story, so he's gonna watch me like, oh, what is that? I'm like, oh, I thought you already beat the game. You should have known. It's like, I didn't know what that is. How do you get that? I'm like, figure it out yourself, dude. It's part of the fun of games is exploring it in the way that the developers, you know, intend you to explore it, but also in your own way. And I think for my game, I definitely want somebody to at least go through the story before they just, you know, fire up creative mode and then tweak things out of balance and then, oh, this game's not fun, it sucks. I've already done everything, peace. So I want it to be a memorable experience. So So I have these ship types here, and I'll show you how I'm using those in a little bit. Those allow me to sort of dynamically go through my ship UI elements. And yeah, so here I have, I'm just in my ready function. So this is called when the node enters the scene for the first time. I'm determining if we're editing or if we're making a new system. If we are editing, we don't need to have this add system button anymore. So I'm disabling it and also setting it to be invisible, just to be super safe. And then on the flip side, if we are creating a new system, I don't want to have the edits button or the delete button displayed. Those are not relevant for adding a brand new system. So doing that. And then here's where I'm populating my ship UI elements. So you can see here I've got the references to the node tree here as far as where these children nodes are at, and I'm just storing them in a somewhat sane manner, I think. So like for all my fighter ones, I have the fighter range, which is a line edit field that determines the percent chance of a fighter ship spawning. And then I have like fighter faction 0, which is the independent faction, the chance of that. Faction 1, which is like the select, the option button. So I have all these set. So the reason the how I'm using my ship types is I can set these to be too lower, like all lowercase, and I can dynamically get those things here, and I use those in a few other ways as well within the also for setting data. Because if you notice back up here in my ship probabilities, what are these keys? Fighter, freighter, cruiser, and carrier. So I want to be able to quickly dynamically access those keys, and that's kind of how I'm doing. That's how I'm leveraging this ship type array. I think this might be not used that much anymore. This was used heavily when I was messing with sliders, because if I change the value for fighter, I need to modify all the other ones. So I was kind of tracking that with that. I think this might not be used that much anymore, but we'll see. So here I'm going through and I'm adding all the options for every faction and option button. So I'm just iterating through every faction in my factions list, which is right up here. So I'm iterating through every single one of these factions. So add item takes two parameters. It takes the text you want to add, and then it takes the actual index value that you want to set that item as. So because I'm storing both of those things, I'm just setting them directly from my array. So for every faction and factions, it's setting all 9 of my option buttons. And then once I got that, I'm setting option buttons to use the value that we have in StarSystem. So again, if we go back up here to StarSystem, if we are editing an existing StarSystem, then StarSystem will be overwritten with the actual data that we pull from our StarSystem map. So inside of main, when we go to let me go up to process, I think is where it's at. So if we right click, you know, we're instancing new StarSystem, we're setting edit existing to be true, and we're also adding the StarSystem data to be what we actually have. So what is actual in our StarSystem map. So we're overriding that. That way we can work with the updated data. So that way we're not always starting from scratch every time. So regardless of if we're doing new system or not, we're still referencing StarSystem because we are initializing it to default values for a new system. And then we're overriding it with actual values if we are editing a system. So that's what we're doing there. We're just overriding the selected property of all the option buttons to be what the actual index is for the faction. So you can see we're doing factions list, and then we're determining the key. So factions list here, the key would be like, you know, harmonious synthocracy. So if we're fetching the value to that key, it would be 1. So we're setting the selected index. Basically, we're just setting it to be whatever we have set for our faction. So that's what we're doing there. I also have this update ship probability UI, which I don't think I'm even using anymore. Or am I? Oh, yeah. I tried to make some non-repeat code here. So I have update ship probability UI, and this just determines like section, because when I was messing with sliders, this was kind of how I was doing that, and I just kind of kept it. So we have section, which is defaulted to all. So if you just hit update, ship probability UI, it's going to go through and it's going to update every single section. So for fighter, freighter, cruiser, and carrier. If not, it's only going to update the section you specify. And then what that does is, here we're specifying a string. So say if we were updating fighter, then what it would do is it would go through my ship UI elements. Here we're constructing our key. So, fighter range. So fighter to lower, we'll make it lowercase fighter range. Guess what? If we go back up to our, so if we look at our UI elements here, you can see we got fighter range. So we're just sort of doing, we're sort of building those keys dynamically based on what system, what stuff we have set. So that's what we're doing there. We're just setting all this stuff here to be what it needs to be. It just updating the actual UI elements to reflect what we actually have in our data structure. That's all that nonsense is doing. So yeah, so I am still using that. I'm also setting up all the other fields too. So because these don't change too often. The only times they change is when you are actually editing them, and that's handled already. So yeah. So that's what we're doing there for this this UI when we're loading it. We're just populating all of our values. Kind of how we store all these references to these UI elements is kind of a pain. There used to be a lot more, because if you look at that picture earlier, you can see here, in addition to the slider bars, there's also this label here that has like 50%. Well, guess what? I wasn't only just managing a line edit, I was managing a slider and then a label. So I had like twice as many nodes to manage, and it was annoying. So sliders saved me a bit of work not using those. It'd be cool to get those working, but that might be a project for a later date. So there we go. That's a lot of the stuff there. I also have this like whenever we do our functions and whatnot. So let's see. Yeah, so everything from here down is all the auto-generated functions from connecting signals to the node editor that I just populated with my own actions. So here, this function was auto-generated, but then I populated what the actual content of that function is. So if our system name changes, what we're doing is we're just updating our name field in our dictionary. That's all we're doing. So for things like where we're modifying like the fighter range, so you can see on fighter range text entered, like all of my range, the things that used to be sliders, they are now just line edit fields, which are actual text fields. So what we have to do is we have to update and validate ship percentage. So if we look at this function here, what this does is this will reset any error message up at as soon as it's called, because this is typically only called when the user is inputting data. So if they're inputting, they're probably fixing any errors that might have been there originally. So we're just clearing out the error message. Then we are converting our text to a float, which it allows it to do this. I believe that if there is no actual number values, it will just default it to be 0. But since this is an internal tool, the onus is on me to enter stuff incorrectly. If this was like a public-facing tool that like I can't, like I would be much more strict on catching errors and stuff if conversions were not done correctly. So I'm just a lot of my code here is not like stuff you would do for like an actual product that you would ship to a consumer, because you can never predict what the user does. They try to do things in different ways, and the best thing you can do if you're going to make a product like that is to strictly sanitize anything that can be input from the user, because you don't want to do something like input some query in your database that will drop the database or something like that in like business logic terms, right? So yeah, always sanitize your input. For me, since I'm doing the input here, I'm kind of lax on it, which is not a great thing, but I was so over fighting with sliders that I decided that I was just gonna run through and do the rest of the stuff really quick. Thankfully, I still put comments and stuff on what I'm trying to do, so that's cool. So then I'm determining if this converted float is within my bounds. So I want, it's going to be a percentage. So 0 to 100, 0% chance or 100% chance. Like anywhere between there is good. If it's out of bounds, I'll display a error message and I'll just return early. I won't execute anything else with this function. And then the user, me, can fix whatever the error tells me to do. So next, we should have a usable value. Let's update our value. So if we have a usable value, I'm updating my star system ship probabilities based on the ship type that we specified here. So fighter, for example. So fighter chance is going to equal what I set my new value as. And then once I do that, I'm determining if the sum of all ship probabilities is 100. So here you can see I'm just iterating through every one of my ship types. I'm getting their probabilities chance, and I'm adding it to just one big sum. And if that sum does not equal 100, then I'm going to output an error message that tells me, you know, what the sum equals, which is what we ran into earlier, where it was for faction probability though, but very similar approach. And then we have a function here for update and validate faction percentage, which is a very similar process. You know, we are with one extra check. So I'm clearing out my error message here, and I'm also checking, do we have a faction selected for this? Because, so I don't want anybody to be able to like set 100% chance or something like that. So you cannot set faction probability without specifying a faction. So I have to go here and select harmonious synthocracy, and then come here and modify it again. And you can see now it's doing the check where the sum doesn't equal what it needs to be. So we can set this to be 0, and bam, there you go. So cool stuff to do there. That's what I did there. I want the faction to be set before I set the percentage for that, just to mitigate the risk of having a 100% chance to like not have a faction, because technically independent is the faction that is no faction. So yeah, good stuff there. So again, same logic, converting a text to float, ensuring that it's within bounds, displaying a message if it is not, and then setting that value, because we should have a usable value. So I'm setting that faction chance variable for my star system data structure for the appropriate ship type. And then again, I'm going through and I'm making sure that we have a sum of everything that we need to do. And if the sum doesn't equal 100, then we are displaying a message that says no bueno. So that's what we're doing there. And then I have a helper function to update the faction. So whenever somebody selects a faction within one of the drop downs, what I have to do is I have to get the value from the UI element, because the signal that option button gives me only gives me the new index of what is selected. So what I have to do is I have to initialize this faction name variable. Then I have to create like this lowercase string, and then I'm using that to basically build the key. So you can see here S. So if ship type is fighter, S is going to be ship type to lower, so it's going to be lowercase fighter. So it's going to be fighter FAC for faction plus the faction number, which is the supplied argument here, and then select. So what that will do is that will give me like you know, fighter faction 1 select. So that's a really messy way of rigging that up, but it was the only way I knew how to do it. So since I was rigging everything up by the node editor for signals, I can see quickly here that's like, hey, like on fighter fac 1 range text entered. So I can see that this is clearly for faction 1 and for fighter. So in my update and validate faction percentage, I'm just passing in fighter the number 1 and then the new text, and that function can work to update the data from there. So that's what we're doing. Let me go back to that, update and validate. There we go. So it's just it's getting the actual faction name from my so it's getting that element, that option button node, and then it's using get item text with the index that it passed us to get us the actual, you know, factions text that we needed. I could have probably actually not done that at all and just used, since I'm standardizing my factions here, I could have probably just done that. But whatever, I got it working. I'm not going to mess with it. I did a lot of this code super late at night, so a lot of it's really rough. But again, it's an internal tool. It's not like a production ready thing. I'm still actively working on it, so it's still really rough. But that was a lot of the bulk of what I did to accomplish this. I just added in my new fields, added a bunch more UI elements, and then yeah, I could have probably done a lot of this stuff in code. So for example, rather than having all of this stuff here, I could have like defined a scene. So for example, like for this whole section here, so fighter, the fighter percentage, and then the actual, let me see. Yeah. So this whole section here, this could have been like a scene. So it could have been like a ship probability scene or whatever. I could have done that, and then I could have just initialized some variables for that with code, and I could have a dynamic number of ship probabilities. So as I add more classes of ships, I could have just, in the ready function, I could have just populated my UI with that scene and connected signals via code, and that probably would have saved me a lot of time had I done that. But I didn't do that because I'm an idiot. So this is a good video on how not to do UI. So yeah, since all this stuff is basically the same, so all four of these sections are the same, just make it a scene, like make it its own component that you can load in and add that node whenever you want. And then you could specify some things. So for example, I could probably specify, you know, what the label is, like what ship type it's for, and then it could have just handled everything else for me. And then I could have connected signals via code and probably had a lot less actual code in here as well. I could have had a lot less of these elements here that I would have to manage. I could have just dynamically found those. Since they're made with code, I wouldn't have to do all this so much, and I wouldn't have 50 billion of these connector functions. I could have maybe like 5 instead. But that's how I got it rigged up, and that's how it's working. So I'm not going to mess with it right now. If I feel inventive later on, I might mess with it, but my standards are pretty lax with this because it's just an internal tool, and I'm sure eventually as I have to expand it more and more, I'm going to get fed up with doing it this way, and I'm just going to refactor it to be how it should be. But until I get to that point, this is how it is. But yeah, that's what I did there, and yeah, I'm going to work on adding more and more stuff to it. So ship system backgrounds is the next big thing. And then I also got to think of like asteroids, spawning asteroids. That's going to be a fun thing to think about. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and listening to me ramble. I will see you in the next episode.